Whoa, that Bible passage is super intense. So Jesus comes to the disciples and asks them, "Who do you say that I am?" He gets some sideways responses, but then Peter nails it and says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of God." And Jesus responds to him, "I'm going to found my church upon you, Peter." So it all looks awesome, but then it goes south. Jesus begins to talk about what type of Messiah he is, that he's one of sacrificial love, that he must die. And that freaks Peter out. And Peter starts to rebuke him. He's attacking Jesus. And then Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." It's this full-on clash. That's intense. Well, they're talking about Peter being what the church will be founded on. And the word Ekklesia is only used in the Gospel of Matthew twice. It's the only spot in the Gospels. And this is a key moment about church. And it strikes me that church can go sideways. Church can be wonderful, but it can go south too. Church can be amazing when it remembers we're based on sacrificial love. And when there's that type of selflessness and compassion, church can be amazing. But also, just like Peter, church can go sideways and become about power or authority. Listen, you know this. Church is both wonderful and not so wonderful. You can hold a complex thought, but so often in the stories we tell and in newspapers and such, it's hard to hold that complexity. And there's been a lot of tough talk about church these days. Sometimes when I'm reading about church in newspapers, I'm not even sure what they're talking about, because when I think about church, I actually don't think first about all the religious stuff. I know that sounds strange. But when I think about church, I think about human community and our life together. The elements of church that I most think about are the ways we visit the hospitals and the nursing homes and people that are lonely and distressed, the just caring of souls, the caring for souls. I think of that kind of basic activity, not so much all the doctrine and religious ritual, or I think about service to the wider community. When you say the word church to me, I think about all the groups we have trying to serve the vulnerable in our community, trying to work for justice. When you say church to me, I think about all our classes and education and the life of the mind and all our lectures. And when you say church, I think about music. We need places that are really musical, where people can gather to sing and make music. Church is the number one spot for grassroots music in the world. When you say church to me, I think about human lives living together. I think about how there needs to be a place for the elderly to still be leaders, to still be in the game. I think of a place where children are welcome and all the children's activities. When you say church, I'm not thinking about religion first. I'm thinking about friendships and sociability and dinner parties and potlucks. But when you read about church in newspapers or people talk about it, they're talking about some sort of funky religious perspective, or when communities become doctrinaire or authoritarian or just plain mean. And that can happen. But church means so much more than me. So there is this negative storyline going on. You can read it in newspapers, hear it on NPR all the time, that far less people are Christian now than ever before, that far less people go to church than ever before, that far less people belong to a local congregation. And all of that statistically is true. But I want to lift up two elements. One, that I actually think there's some good things happening. And two, the scale of Christianity is so massive. When we're talking about things decreasing, you're talking about something mammothly huge becoming slightly less mammothly huge. Let me explain. There are 350,000 churches in America. That's an extraordinary number. And 65% of Americans still say that they are Christian. That is an extraordinarily large number, too. 350,000 churches. there are 15,000 Starbucks. Get the scale right. 350,000 churches, there are 13,000 McDonald's. Do you see how massive this is? 350,000 churches in America. There are about 140,000 gas stations. Do you see how large this is? 350,000 churches. There's about 55,000 bars. There's a lot of churches. And so we're talking a massive scale. It's still the single largest physical gathering of human beings. Every weekend, almost 60 million people are gathering at church. It's beyond our imagination. It's mammoth. But yes, there is some downward pressure. Less people go, and less often. The biggest change we're experiencing at First-Plymouth is people go less times per month. People that used to go 3 times a month go 2 times a month. People that used to go 2 times a month go once a month. People that used to go 10 times a year go 7 times a year. And that has implications. People seem to be combining digital worship. Hey, you're either combining digital worship right now or you're only doing digital worship with coming physically. And that does change the number at any given one worship service. At First-Plymouth, we have about 80% of people in physical attendance, 80% of what we used to have before COVID. So things have changed. But on that given Sunday, a couple thousand people are watching digitally as well. So it gets hard to determine how do you measure vitality. There's a lot going on in church, but remember how massive Christianity is. It's getting smaller. Maybe it's not too bad to get a little smaller. But there's more people going to church now than did in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. We're still at what are historically high levels of church involvement. So remember the scale. But I want to get into something else. I actually think what the newspapers believe is a negative storyline is actually positive. Let me explain. You'll read that now 30% of Americans, 30%, don't affiliate with any religion. They're called the nones. That there's 30%, that's a big number, of Americans that won't claim they have any religion. And so the newspaper stories are just assuming this means religion is dying. I think it's actually a much more positive storyline. That 30%, if you actually interview those human beings, the vast majority of them still believe in God. Well, what is religion? In some basic sense, it's some interior idea that there is meaning and purpose and a higher power. If they say they believe in God, well, that sounds like religion to me. They may not be affiliating with a denomination or a particular organized religion. And if you really talk with these people and ask them what their values are, a lot of it aligns almost perfectly with our form of religion, the congregational church or more liberal or open-minded forms of religion. A lot of their values are exactly the same. Let me explain. So the congregational church was founded on the idea of freedom of individual conscience, that each person must come to know God and Christ in their own way, and that doctrine shouldn't be imposed upon them. So there was this idea that religion shouldn't be based on authority moves, like you've got to believe it because the Bible says so or because the Pope says so. No, religion could be genuine in your heart. Your experience of Christ and God, your understanding of life doesn't have to be imposed upon you. Well, that core liberal value is the vast majority of that 30%. They're living out. In fact, I would say they're living out one of the key themes of Christianity in America. You can know God for yourself. And there's more. It's a key theme in open-minded religion that we should listen to the best verdicts of modern philosophy and science, and scholarship should inform our religion. And if you talk to that 30%, they believe in ideas and the rational mind and science and exploring life, and all of that is part of religion too. And open-minded religion embraced pluralism, that multiple paths to God is a beautiful thing. So Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, that there can be many ways up that mountain. And so if you talk to this 30%, they've embraced a type of pluralism. There's not one right way to God. So they actually are expressing a form of religion, really. That type of open-mindedness, that religion doesn't have to be about taking the Bible literally. It can be more symbolic or poetic. Or what about inclusivity? That's a key theme in liberal religion. And a lot of that 30% believe that we should recognize the dignity of every human being, and that being gay isn't a sin, that there's many different ways to live this human life. Really, that 30% looks like it's expressing some of the deepest religious values I know. So are we getting less religious? Or are we getting better at being religious? A more open-minded heart, a more peaceful sensibility. I know a lot of Americans have sort of an anti-institutional sense these days, and maybe for some good reasons. Our institutions at times have failed us. But the word institution at some point just means that human beings have to come together and there has to be some structures. So even if we let certain structures go, we'll have to recreate structures where we can be in community, in some sense of a common purpose. So here at First-Plymouth, we're trying to be good church. We'll fail at that at times. But with some humility, we'll keep trying. So I'm glad you popped on today. This is religion right now. I hope it's good religion. May God bless you.